This is a podcast brought to you by the Iclif Executive Education Center at the Asia School of Business. With us today is Gabe Shawn Varges, Senior Partner, HCM International, Chairman of the GECM Group Switzerland, and an adjunct faculty at the Asia School of Business. Good morning, Gabe. Thank you for taking time off your busy schedule to answer some burning questions about the future of managing the workplace and people.
Thank you very much. Delighted to be here.
So let's start then. My first question is about recruiting young talent. Could you tell us what are the type of skills that they bring to the workplace, and why is this important for organizations to recognize anyway?
Indeed. And by the way, I'm very happy that we're addressing this critical topic at ASB. As you know, we just completed here a course called The Future Managing of People in the Workplace, and it really triggered lively discussions and reflection, particularly among some of the younger participants. Coming to your question, millennials, and let's be clear on the terminology, that encompasses Generation Y and Z, they do have a great deal to offer an employer. And of course, as with any other generation, there is a wide range of skills in these generations. However, in general, one can say that these generations share high levels of energy, of curiosity, concern for the planet, and IT savviness. After all, the majority are digital natives. For employers, the challenge is how to harness these strengths for the work of the company. Another fascinating point is that the new generations have much in common across cultural and even geographic frontiers. It may be, for example, that a Generation Z young man or young woman may have more in common with another Gen Z person in another country than they may do with a Generation X person in his or her own country.
We often hear about the difficulties of attracting and retaining millennials. And there seems to be a disconnect between what they want and what the employers expect of them and are even prepared to give them. Could you shed some light on this conundrum between, what they want, what the employers expect?
In the 1960s, a sociologist spoke of the generation gap. They described a situation where the life perceptions and expectations between the older generations and the younger generations had become so different that the generations could not communicate effectively anymore with each other. Today's employers have to work very hard to avoid this. We cannot alienate the new generations. They are our current, and together with the next generation called Generation Alpha, our future workforce. But it is true that Generation Y, and particularly Generation Z, have different views from us on many topics, including on how to work and what it means to be successful professionally.
Could you please elaborate a little on that, Gabe?
Sure. The new generations value flexibility and variety. Quite apart from the issue of working from home, Generations Y and Z would like to be masters of their own day. Of course, as employers, we also have the responsibility to set parameters in order to meet business needs. But must the workday really be 9 to 5? Could not one offer those who are night owls 11 to 7 instead? And must it be Monday through Friday? What would happen if a prospective employee came to you and said, I would like to work for your company, but I would like to work Monday, Tuesday, take Wednesday off, come back on Thursday, Friday, and work on Saturday? Would we be open to that kind of flexibility and options?
So that's something for employers to think about here. Gabe, we often hear that, millennials are very passionate about ESG and ethical business. I'm wondering whether this is a cliche, because if you notice in more developed economies, you have political parties that champion climate change, biodiversity, and a lot of young people support these parties. But in less developed economies or emerging economies, the issue may be more bread and butter issues about holding down a job, and they may not be so invested in ESG and other practices. What are your views on this?
Well, certainly we need to differentiate two things. One is ESG in the sense of a social and environmental and governance concern from any kind of hijacking of that term by any political movement. We should not see this somehow as making a political choice. But your question really brings us back to what I said earlier, that the new generations define professional success differently. First, for them, professional success does not equate to longevity with one employer. The statistics suggest that the new generations are much more open to switching employers, indeed even to switching careers, than earlier generations. Second, professional success for the new generations relates to some notion of purpose, of meaning. Whether it's the purpose of launching a new startup, or whether the purpose is working for a company that the new generations feel is reaching or fulfilling some larger good. The new generations need to have that feeling of being fulfilled in some way. Sure, they want employment, but they also want this extra. And therefore, knowing this, we as employers need to ask ourselves, do we offer things that meet these needs by these new generations? For example, is our work set up such that it gives people, young people, enough responsibility early? Do we overemphasize seniority or hierarchy at our company? And given the imperative for organizations to take seriously the overall role in society, what are we doing as a company to be sustainable? ESG, as you mentioned, is a common topic today, and in fact, it is an excellent platform for the expression of these concerns. In this connection, by the way, one area of ESG that's often neglected is the area, and you mentioned it briefly, the area of ethics, the area which relates, of course, to governance, to compliance, to culture, to values. Hence, if an employer wants to be responsive to the needs of younger generations, it can also say to itself, to what degree are we working hard enough on these topics, including, as I said, the areas of ethics and compliance.
That's insightful. Thanks for that. Okay, so I have a question about, the feedback that employers give in this region. They feel that millennials have unrealistic expectations about pay and benefits, and they're not prepared to work long, hard hours to earn the remuneration that they actually want or demand. Could you share with us your perspective, since you're a consultant to a large number of global companies? What I'm trying to say is that this is a common grouse in this region, that they want high pay, they want flexible time and work hours, but they're not like us. So how do you address that?
It is indeed a very good question. And by the way, it is a question that concerns as well smaller companies, the public sector, and all industries. So it's not limited only to large global multinationals. First, clearly an employer has to manage expectations. We have to know that we owe a responsibility to shareholders, responsibility to our employees to ensure that it doesn't lead to a reduction of jobs because we're doing things the wrong way. But at the same time, there are a lot of things that the employers can do in order to address this managing of expectations. One is that we need to think about, for example, the area of reward and recognition. And what we're finding in working with companies of all sizes is that the reward and recognition system of many companies was set up many years ago, and certainly not with the new generations in mind. For example, why is it that companies do have a share award program which is sometimes known as a long-term incentive. Why is that based on seniority? Because you know what it effectively means? That's limited only to people over 50 or 40. Given the startup mentality of many of the new generations, would it not make sense to change that and to say, let's make some of our share options or share award programs open also to younger people when they join us? This would help not only with motivation, but with retention. Now, often I hear, or we hear when we speak with employers and point this out, they say, yeah, but you told us already that the new generations want to change jobs and change careers, so this isn't going to help, is it? Well, it's true that the new generations are likely to change jobs, and therefore having, for example, a smarter system of rewards and recognition may not necessarily prevent them from leaving at some point. But it could help prolong their stay. Imagine if you could just simply prolong the stay of a generation Y or Z by 2 years or 3 years. That already would be a big help. Think about the cost of recruiting a new employee, training a new employee. So if we can prolong this, and who knows, among those that we've prolonged by 2 or 3 years, if they start then getting a sense of, maybe I may like it here long term, then they might stay then 5 or 8 or 10 years. This is something that is incremental. It's not a one-pill solution, but it certainly could help.
Yeah, that's interesting, Gabe, because then it seems like it's not unrealistic expectations, it's mismatched expectations of employers using an old model that might have worked with their generation to millennials that have different values and goals, right?
That's very well expressed.
Gabe, I'd like to seek your views on the Great Resignation. Why is this happening?
First, we need to be very careful with slogans. It is true that attrition rates in companies in many countries have tended to increase since COVID, but not necessarily to the same degree. At the same time, employers need to be sensitive to this trend, particularly since the rate of voluntary departures has tended to be higher among the new generations and among women. The latter, by the way, is often referred to as the great breakup.
Okay.
But whether or not these trends have come to one's company, I think one needs to constantly be asking, why is it happening at all? And there's one concrete step that every company can do right now, which is to revisit their whole exit interview process and ask themselves, in these exit interviews, are we designing the questions? And by the way, are the people who are asking the questions in the exit interview professionally trained to do so? Designing these questions to go deep as to the reasons why people leave the company, to see if there are lessons that we can draw on company culture, on the way the company's organized, on how managers treat people, or whether the company is offering enough development and growth for younger people. We have to go deeper in these exit interviews and then use this data, really analyze it, take it back, and as part of being a learning organization, say, we're going to take action steps based on this input, so see if we can improve. And if we have it already, reduce the Great Resignation. And if we don't have it yet, prevent the Great Resignation from coming to our company.
I'd like to pick up what you said about exit interviews. My understanding is currently a lot of companies have a predetermined set of questions. They might actually give it on paper, or they might get somebody in HR to ask these questions and elicit answers. But you talk about being trained. Can you elaborate a little bit more about what kind of training?
Think about the different impact that one has through a podcast of this sort, where we can have an exchange, versus if you had just sent me a questionnaire to answer. The richness of what one can learn through an actual dialogue with an exiting employee is far more than if you get some written answers. You can ask follow-up questions. You can look at people's eyes and see how they're explaining something. You can read their emotions. That's the kind of insights we need to gain. It cannot be done online. It cannot be done on paper. And also it cannot be done, as some have suggested, maybe just as some companies are currently doing already, some robo-interviews for potential hires. Do not move to a robo-exit questionnaire, because then you would be losing that human touch and the ability to really read people's emotions, which is going to give you a much deeper insights as to why they may have left.
Thank you. That's really great information for our companies. Okay, so there's some views about, employers being more empathetic about employees' well-being. This is the current discussion topic. So could you give us your views? Is it a good practice? Does it place too heavy a burden on employers or the managers, right? Because how do they balance the need for employees to deliver outcomes? As you said, earlier about shareholders, and you need to deliver to your employees and your shareholders, but at the same time being empathetic to the personal challenges of employees. The gist of what my understanding is that employers are a little afraid of going down this path, because then where do you stop? Where do you tell the employee, I'm empathetic to your personal challenges, but I really need you to perform, or to achieve this outcome?
And you really touched on the two tensions here. The first one, of course, is, as you indicated, however well-intentioned we may wish to be, at the end of the day, our companies operate in a competitive environment where they have to produce and deliver. And the worst outcome, of course, is that we don't and we go out of business, in which case we're not doing anyone a favor. Therefore, keeping that in mind, one might potentially reframe the question. Instead of saying we need to be empathetic and results-driven, we might instead say this: in order to deliver better results, we need to be more emotionally aware, more empathetic. And I think we're learning very much that, whereas in earlier times we said, let's just be aware of soft factors, that's too superficial. We need to go deeper, because empathy includes better understanding of what motivates an employee and being more sensitive to how an employee may feel, not just to how they think.
Okay, but coming from the employer, the manager's perspective, if I understand your personal challenges, then where does it stop? Perhaps you have a aging parent at home and that affects your performance. And I do understand and I give you some leeway, but I think what employers might be afraid of, or managers, is that some employees may take advantage of the situation. Is that something realistic? How can you prevent, or is that a trial and error?
I think the best way of thinking about this, rather than saying there will be employees who take advantage of it, because on any kind of work arrangement, even in the old days where it was order and command and tell people what to do, there could be some who could try to game the system. So rather than looking at it from a suspicious standpoint, let's think more about how the notion of management and leadership has become more complex. And that part of the future skills, indeed, during our class this week, was to talk about how do we as leaders, as managers, need to enlarge and deepen our toolkit, our skills, and one of them is in this area. And part of it might be helping identify also situations where we are crossing the line. After all, we cannot become a crutch to an employee. We certainly cannot become their psychologist. But short of that, we certainly can be a lot more empathetic to particular circumstances of individuals.
Thanks for that. Gabe, this term that's thrown around about psychological safety in organizations. Can you explain what the term means? And how it benefits leaders and organizations. Are there any disadvantages of this term, psychological safety?
You know, the notion of psychological safety, which is being advanced by a number of scholars and practitioners, can be, in fact, very useful as part of shaping a company's culture. It relates a great deal to creating an environment where people can feel free to express their opinions and to speak up, such as suggesting improvement needs or even suggesting new innovations. From that perspective, it can even be connected to an innovation agenda. And of course, it relates as well to providing comfort that it is okay to try and even potentially fail, that it is okay to make certain kinds of errors. And that safety then allows individuals that sense of comfort to say, instead of my simply offering a limited and careful set of ideas, I may be more daring, a little bit more innovative, more imaginative. And this is something almost every company needs, regardless of what industry they're in. Now, there are limits to the concept of psychological safety, and it reaches those limits when it's misused to actually achieve the opposite, when it's misused to limit open and robust debate for the fear that some in the room may not feel, quote, safe hearing some ideas or points of view. When it is misused for that purpose, it not only negates the benefits, but creates its own disadvantages. Okay. And therefore, as with other concepts, I think organizations have to become sophisticated in understanding and using the notion of psychological safety and put it to use constructively. And we're seeing a number of examples of companies experimenting with this. This includes a major digital company that is impacting all of our lives. They're using it. There is also a pharmaceutical multinational who's doing some interesting work. They're actually tying the notion of psychological safety to their ethics and compliance program, with the thinking that if we can provide people the comfort, the safety to say, I just saw a business practice that I don't feel comfortable with, that maybe doesn't live up to our company's promise under ESG to treat the customer fairly, I feel safe raising that concern, and I'm not going to be thought of as disloyal.
And this is linked to the speaking up culture, the speak up culture?
It's linked up to the whole ethics and compliance and cultural efforts to have people feel more free to express their views and to raise concerns.
I think we're running out of time. Thank you so much for taking time off to do this podcast for us, Gabe. I understand that you do a program on future managing of the workplace and people at ASB. We look forward to more people attending your program after this podcast.
Thank you. I look forward to offering it again. And of course, at ASB, there's a whole palette of programs offered. I look forward to some of your listeners coming and meeting them at some point in the future.
I'm sure they will. Thank you.